Chapter 12 of Graham the Gargoyle, Crossing Over. His father had not returned from his visit with Blord's parents. He had left just before dinner, already in a grumpy mood over having to return to the village that evening. He wasn't much of a night flyer. He hadn't even asked Graham for his side of the story. All he knew was that Blord had something that Graham had stolen. His mother was distressed that Graham was in more trouble. Dinner had been eaten in silence, except for Flynn, who had enough conversation in her to make up for the rest of the family's tight lips. We have to make an invention, Mom. We're studying great inventors, both magical and mortal. I'm going to do a mortal invention. I remember what Dad said about messing with spells and stuff, Flynn gushed. Switching topics, she continued on with her monologue. I think I want to rearrange my room. Will you help me, Mom? I want my bed to go next to the window. We're studying astronomy next, and I want to get a head start. I think you can see the dagger constellation clearly right now. Can we do it tonight? Their mom nodded as she slowly chewed her food, her face strained. Graham spoke before his sister could resume her one-sided conversation. May I be excused? I want to visit grandfather. His mother's expression softened. Oh, don't do that. He asked for no visits tonight. He's not feeling well at all. Graham nodded. He placed his dishes in the kitchen basin and returned to his bedroom. As he pushed a stool next to his window, he retrieved a book from his bookcase. He flipped to the 9th chapter and half-heartedly read The Giant's Footfall. It was a flying mummy adventure about how he had faced off against an evil giant determined to steal the beauty of Aphrodite. Graham had already read it twice, but was going through it a third time out of boredom. The next volume in the series wasn't due to be released for another month. He was eager to spend his allowance on that volume, Dragon Delivery Services. He couldn't focus on the words. He was too worried about his father's imminent return. If he was lucky, his father would arrive home with no one to shout and snarl at. If things worked out, Graham would be long gone, following his grandfather into a new world where bullies maybe didn't loom so large. He forced himself to muddle his way through the next few chapters, growing more and more relieved to see his father had not returned. Maybe Graham would indeed sneak off before he got home. He heard his mother and sister moving furniture across the hall. He decided not to help, something he would normally do for Flynn. Despite how often she rearranged her room, he was always there to assist. His chest tightened. What would she do without him? His absence would be hard for her, but he was reasonably certain it was better for Flynn to be the sister of the gargoyle who ran away than related to one who failed in their first flight. Just as he was finishing the scene where the animated meatloaf tricked the giant's cook into opening the cage and freeing the scarf dwarf, his mother knocked and entered his room. She announced it was bedtime and extinguished his will-o-wisp lantern. Graham slipped into bed and kissed her sincerely on the forehead. It would be the last time he would see her. Good night, Mom. Good night, dear. She hastened to the door, stopping to straighten the crooked picture frame that held his Flying Mummy limited edition poster. Mom? Yes? Graham took in a breath. He exhaled quickly, rushing his words out at nearly the same speed. I love you. She winked. I love you too, Graham. Don't worry about your father. Whatever he needs to say to you can wait until morning. Get your rest. Tomorrow's your big day. The moment the door shut, he unearthed himself from his bedding and slid open his closet. He had packed for his trip earlier in the evening, filling his backpack with the necessities he thought he might need to survive on Earth. He unzipped the pack and double-checked his inventory. 2 bags of Brumbleberry cookies, a scarf, a will-o-wisp mini-lantern, his favorite Flying Mummy comic, a pocket knife, a light jacket, and a crude slingshot stared back at him, looking surprisingly inadequate for the earthly mission he was undertaking. He was about to go through his room one last time to comb for more essentials when he heard his grandfather's door creak open. Graham slung his pack over his shoulder and scrambled to the window. After almost an eternity, his mother opened the front door. Hunched over in what appeared to be terrible pain, his grandfather emerged onto the front walkway. He hadn't seen the elder gargoyle walk in weeks. Each feeble step reminded him of a baby's, clumsy and untested. Graham's mom helped him down the path, kissing and hugging him with finality at the front gate. His grandfather, painstakingly slow, stumbled to the left, entering the woods through a narrow path Graham knew led to the village's largest summoning stone. It wasn't used often as it was not as accessible as the others in town, but for Graham's family, it was practically next door. Only their house and the widow Stemmel's were this far out from the village. He waited for his mother to retreat into the house and extinguish the porch light before he squeezed out of his window and raced after his grandfather. He caught up to the slow-moving gargoyle quickly. Graham hung back, using the moonlight to help him navigate rather than pulling out his mini-lantern. His grandfather never looked back. He shambled through the woods, pausing once in a while to lean against a tree and catch his breath. Finally, after what felt like almost an hour, they arrived at the portal clearing. It was exactly like Graham remembered from his class field trip when he had been a level 4 student. The summoning stone was large and flat. It was smooth on the top with etched symbols running along its perimeter. An 8-foot-tall red obelisk stood at the tip of the egg-shaped stone platform. Atop it, a simple pottery bowl rested in a concave perch. Graham settled into a large bush, checking for skeeters and finding none. If he had disturbed one of their nests or hives, he would have surely drawn his grandfather's attention and numerous stings. For a moment he was lost in the night music of the forest. He heard the agitated hum of several lava beetles, but they were thankfully just flying by, their fiery red abdomens glowing red. A distinctive screeching of a stout owl sounded, followed by a shriek that was cut short. Obviously, the nocturnal predator had silenced its prey with a swift twist of its massive talons. His grandfather climbed onto the summoning stone. He crawled across it and stood at its center. He briefly looked up at the night sky, taking one last look at Cascade, their adopted home, before dropping to one knee and bowing his head toward the obelisk. Burning tears streamed down Graham's face. He wondered if his grandfather wept as well. The forest sounds around them lessened. Did the creatures sense that magic was about to be unleashed? The forest grew quiet as even the ever-present chirping of the noisy lava beetles ceased. The silence was broken by his grandfather, who started reciting the spell that would summon the portal to Earth. He had committed the spell to memory. It was tradition to do so. Graham listened intently, hoping in vain he could remember the exact words and use it to return to Cascade. Midway through, he gave up. No chance of remembering all that. Resigned to his fate, he instead closed his eyes and listened to the tender richness of his grandfather's voice. He thought of the special night they had spent together with the flying mummy, and of how much closer he now felt to his grandfather. Graham opened his eyes as his grandfather uttered the last line of the spell. He still kneeled at the center of the summoning stone. Nothing else had changed. No massive portal had opened up before him. Had he gotten the spell wrong? Magic was finicky. Maybe he had mispronounced a word or skipped a whole line. Was there another line to the spell that the hardened gargoyle could no longer utter? That would be the case if his tongue had seized up and become stone. Graham didn't know how it all worked. Would his grandfather turn to stone slowly or all at once? Graham was about to burst from his hiding spot to check on the unmoving gargoyle when he spotted a small winged creature flying by overhead. It was high in the sky, but he could tell from its movements that it was a bat. Had it come from the shadow territories nearby? Bats were not common to Cascade. It was more than likely a vampire in disguise. His grandfather didn't look up. Suddenly, the pottery bowl resting on the obelisk lifted into the air. It floated over the summoning stone, stopping above his grandfather. It was so close that the old gargoyle could reach up and snatch it from the air, but he didn't. Instead, he turned his head up and smiled. Graham could tell his movements were labored, requiring extreme effort. The bowl tilted, and from it spilled a shower of rich earth. The reddish particles spilled but didn't drop onto his grandfather. Instead, they gathered into a large cloud. More dirt than the small bowl could possibly hold poured out until the cloud was now as wide-reaching as the summoning stone. Graham reasoned a cornucopia spell had to have been placed on the bowl. Only the wizard Bailey and Robinson were known to cast those. The cloud danced about in the air but did not fall onto his grandfather. It funneled into an arch a few feet in front of the older gargoyle. When the bottom of the arch finally touched the stone, it began to glow a vibrant orange. Graham inched out of the bush, knowing he would be spotted if his grandfather turned around now. He stepped closer to the summoning stone. The gate would open soon. He sensed that much. And it wouldn't stay open long. He would have seconds to follow once his grandfather took the plunge. He tensed, readying himself for fast action. The space within the arch filled with rolling bolts of green and yellow energy. His grandfather lifted his arms. The effort was taxing. Graham drew up next to the summoning stone, feeling faint warmth radiate from the rock. He placed one foot on the stone, expecting its surface to burn him. It was heated, but not dangerously so. The air above the summoning stone was thick with magic. It was almost electric. Suddenly the clearing was engulfed in a blinding light from the arch. This was it. The portal was here. Graham raced across the stone as his grandfather disappeared into the gateway. Graham pressed on, ignoring how weighty the air around him felt. It was as if the magic was collapsing inward, driving its weight back into the portal. He didn't have much time. He hurtled forward, diving into the shrinking rift without any hesitation. From the shadows of a nearby Eula tree, the lone figure that had been trailing Graham rushed onto the summoning stone. The gateway to Earth was about to pop out of existence. The figure cursed the air around him and heaved himself into the portal, clutching desperately to a rolled piece of parchment. So now you will have to spend the next chapter trying to figure out who followed Graham and his grandfather to Earth.